Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Decryption, and I hope you are well. You know what tutorial style I really like? That one from GTA San Andreas. It's such a nice thing. So on the past, when I used to live stream games, you can see when the game starts, it pops up, there's an audible bing.
Here we go.
Ding. It pops up,
Okay.
it shows nicely, and then eventually, once I get out of the controls, then eventually it'll fade away, and then that's it. End of the tutorial. And then if it needs to, another one will pop up shortly. And where is it? I believe one pops up saying, use this to move the camera or something. Apparently mine's not showing it today. But yeah, so it's really nice. So I figured, let's make that. Let's get started. So, where are we going to start? So what I'm actually going to do is open Critter, a drawing program first, and we're going to break it down, because this is where it gets a bit funky to do, because it's not as easy as just writing the text. You could, but up, down, left, right doesn't apply to a controller. You'll use the left thumbstick. Or like if you have press E to interact, won't work on a controller, and let alone it will work differently on different controllers you have, whether you're on PlayStation or Xbox. So we have to break it down to make it cross-platform. So on here you see, the green is anything that is text. We can type that in. Anything red is a control that we need to change per platform. But here's the next funky thing we're going to cater for today. Anything green also has to be translated. That's where it gets a bit unique. Most things don't have the controls changed, I believe. At least that I've never seen. Maybe it does. But an icon is an icon. So, you know, the W key or the up arrow key is the same in every language, surely. The up arrow key or the left thumbstick. Maybe. But that's something we can look at further down the line, translating platform inputs. But the text we can do. So what I'm thinking is we'll build a system where you can type in text. So you'll say, use key to move Carl, something like that, and then we can display that on the screen. But we're going to build it in a way where we can also have the text at the beginning. So if we don't want use to be there, we can just put key text. Maybe if we want the key at the end, use key, or if we want it in the middle. And we're going to use CommonUI to do it, so it really does drive it across the different platforms we need. Now for this tutorial, you are going to need CommonUI installed and set up. For myself, I'm just going to use Narrative CommonUI because it's free and it's super easy to use. It's already got a bunch of stylings built in for you to use everything you need. Additionally, if you don't want Narrative CommonUI, if you might have your own one, it should work with that. If you don't, then you may just need to run through a CommonUI setup tutorial. It's super easy to do. But Narrative CommonUI, you download it, you configure like 2 things, and then you're done. So, and you can still use CommonUI with the old input system if you need to. It's not like it's going to break your game if you've not used it. So where are we going to start? So what I'm thinking is instead of having in a bunch of different places, say on the character's event begin, press X to jump, or on the level load, press Y to do it, I think it'd be nice if we have all of these texts in a single place. So we can just find them easier, and then we can just say, get this text instead. It'll be quite nice to do. So I'm going to come into my content folder, and in my blueprints data tables, you can really put it any way you want. I'm going to create a new data table that's going to store all of this text. Before we can create the data table, let's create a struct. So I'll right click in my structs folder, blueprint structure, and I'll just call it s_tutorial prompts, and I'll open this up. So realistically, the only tutorial prompt we're going to need here is the text. And it'll just be a type of text. And you've got to make sure it's text, otherwise it won't localize and translate. So for me, the text will just be the only thing we need. But if you wanted any added functionality here, so maybe you want to call a blueprint when this specific tutorial prompt shows, you could do. If you're using the game playability system, which is something I'm going to add into the game eventually, maybe at the point of the tutorial you also want to unlock an ability. You can add the ability into here and tell it to unlock later. So there's plenty of ways you can do this. You can also play a cutscene and there's all sorts like that. So now that we have our struct, I'm going to come back to my data tables folder. I'm going to right click miscellaneous data table. I will search for my struct, so s_tutorial prompts, and I'll just call it dt_tutorial prompts. So let's add our first one. So I'll just add it in. I'll set the row name to something useful because this is how we'll tell the tutorial prompt to show. I'll just call it movement. There we go. And the text will be press, and then in brackets I'm going to type the name of the movement key I want to use. So we'll come back to that in a minute. I'll just put input for now, and then space to move around. I'll put a full stop at the end, why not? So the input, or at least the square brackets, is what we're going to use in order to justify which key we want. So if you are using Narrative CommonUI or any CommonUI setup, inside the plugins folder, controller data, you will have this input actions data table here. You'll have this even if you create a normal CommonUI. This is just what Narrative UI does for you. And inside here, you'll have a list of different row names which have all of the different ways you can move around. So I'm going to add a new one in here. So I'll just click add. And on the row, I will double click it and call it something generic. So movement. The display name, I will call movement. We don't need anything else, but the only things we do need is we need some icons for it and which key will bind to it. The keys we don't necessarily need because we're not going to be using them, but it's nice just to set it anyway. So I'm going to set this to the thumbstick, and I believe there is a 2D axis, so we'll click that. Because that's only if you're using the keys, but we want the displays of it. So you can see we've got these override brushes here where you can set a custom icon. So in order to get these keys working properly and how we want it to, I've actually created some custom textures that we can use, at least in the Narrative CommonUI one. If you are using standard CommonUI, I believe you'll have to find this for yourself. If we press Ctrl B to open up this data table, you see we've got a bunch of these controller datas next to it. And if we go into, say, Xbox, down here you can see we've got a list of all the different controller prompts that an Xbox uses. So if we add one here, and just a heads up, I'm going to get this added into CommonUI because these are so common, they should just be there by default. But what I'm going to do is search for the left thumbstick, and you'll see we have this 2D axis one. So you can see on the Xbox, we have this icon here for the left thumbstick that's got arrows all around it, which is to show use the thumbstick. So I'm going to add that one into this one at the bottom, like so, and I'll save that. I'm going to do the same thing for the PlayStation, because they'll have different icons. So I'll search for left thumbstick 2D because it's the same control scheme, it's just different images. So you can see you've got this L3 black rounded one. So I'll add that in. And then the key thing is we need to make sure the keyboard has one as well. You can do it for the Switch if you want. I'm not going to do it in this tutorial because I'm not going to use a Switch controller. But this one is where we have to get a bit weird with it. Because CommonUI is expecting us to add a key that we're actively going to use, you can't add WASD because WASD are going to do 4 different things. So because we can't use WASD to move around, what I'm going to do is actually cheat and just use the arrow keys instead. So I'm going to come and add a plus here to add a new one at the bottom, and there's quite a lot on the PC version. For the key, I'm just going to search for the keyboard up key, and that's all I'm going to use because you can't physically have an up, down, left, right because they're 4 functionalities, and we're just hooking into it to show the menus if you wish. So in the key brush, I've gone and created a custom one that you're more than happy to use. I'll put a link in the description. So you can see it's a WASD key one there. I tried putting it 4 along, but then it got really awkward because it's fixed sizes on CommonUI. So yeah, I didn't do that. So we'll just assign the WASD key to there and we'll compile and save. But now that we've done that, what we can do is back on our input actions, we can press the up arrow key here, and when we call this data table, CommonUI will automatically link it to the right control UI scheme so we can have the right displays. So I've just changed that around to left thumbstick as well, that's quite important. So we've got movement there, which is perfect. So back on here, what I'm actually going to do is inside these square brackets, I'm just going to call it movement instead, and later we'll pass that out into the row name to use. So I'll do a capital M just as in case as well. Of course, if you want to add multiple things into here, maybe you want to add icons or something, you might be better appending it with input and then passing that out later. But for me, I'm just doing tutorial prompts, so movement is okay for me. Whilst I am here, I am going to come and add another one called looking, and then I will say use look to look around. There we go. And then back on the input actions, we don't have anything already because there's still quite a few that will be built in for you. So I'm going to add another row and I'll call it look. I'll come and name it looking. And then for the key, I'm just going to use the mouse, and I believe there's a mouse 2D axis, so that one will work fine for us. And then for the controller, it will be the same thing, but for the right thumbstick, 2D axis like that. Now, it's always a good time to check if they actually exist. So on the Xbox, do these exist already? So you can see the right 2D isn't added, so we'll come and add that just like we did before. So I'll come and use the right 2D. And then for the icon, we want the 2D. We want the right one, which is already built in, so we can select that. And that's the Xbox done. For the PlayStation, let's come and select that one as well. So I'll add. We'll set it to the right thumbstick again for the 2D axis, and we will also find the right one, which is there, R3, yeah. Add that one, compile and save, and then I believe the PC one actually already has one built in of the mouse, or at least the icon. So if I come and add a new one and scroll down to the bottom, if we search in here for the mouse, I believe there's a 2D axis, yes there is. So in here, let's see if we can find an existing icon. I believe there is one already, because I believe I saw it. There we go. So mouse movement, and we can plug it in like that, and we can compile and save. So now we have 2 tutorial prompts set up, ready for us to use. And of course, you may have skipped all of that part if you've already got this set up. But now that we have our Datatable tutorial prompts there, let's move on to actually creating it in a UI. So I'm going to come back to my UI folder inside my game. I'll go into widgets and I'll just right click user interface widget blueprint. I'll set it to a type of user widget and I'll call it WB for widget blueprint tutorial prompts. But I'm actually going to call this one tutorial prompts because one of the key things I want this tutorial prompt system to do is if we call tutorial prompts twice but there's one still displaying, I don't want it to override the other one. I want it to queue up and wait. So the tutorial prompts parent will be the one that stores that there's a log of them, and then the tutorial prompt child will be the one that actually renders it. So I believe you see this on Grand Theft Auto San Andreas when it first starts, that at the beginning, where it shows press WASD to move around, and then as soon as that one's finished, it pops straight up with the second one saying, use the mouse to look around. So inside this tutorial prompts, I'm just literally going to come and add an overlay panel, and then we'll just make it in a variable, and we'll just compile and save that one for now. That's all we're going to do with that one. Then I'll then come and create another widget blueprint, and this one I'll call WB tutorial prompt single, just so we've got a nice different name, and I'll open it up. So this one is where we actually add the prompt in. So I'm going to add a canvas panel, and I'm going to promote it to a variable, and then this is where we need to think carefully about how we want it to build up, because in here Unreal doesn't contain a way for us to just strip out the brackets. We're going to have to go and do that. But the controls we're going to use to do this is the text node, or you can use the rich text either way. And then we'll apply the text of press to that. Then we're going to use the common action widget here underneath it, but we'll put a horizontal box into it, where we can now come and set everything we need. So the input actions, we can come in and add our data table, which is our narrative one, or whichever one you've created, and then the row name will be the one that we've set. So in this case, it will be, and we'll just set this to W so it's got an editor one. And then you can see when we put it next to each other, we can add another text underneath of it, and this one will be to move around. And then if we wrap this with a horizontal box, just so it's all in the same line, if we wrap this with a horizontal box and then reorganize it so it actually looks correctly, you can see we now have it roughly coming along exactly how we need, where it'll say press W to move around, and that'll say WSD, or it'll say the left thumbstick, which I believe we can come and once we do some wizardry to it, we'll basically be able to make it look really nice. Look, so we can say press L to move around where we. And the way we've built it and the way we're going to code it is we can have multiple of these on the same line if we really need to as well. So how are we going to go around building all of this up dynamically? And it's actually really easy to do. So I'm going to come and promote the horizontal box to a variable so we can actually put our data inside of it. And then in the graph here, I'm going to come and delete everything except the construct. And then I'm going to create a new variable called tutorial prompt to show. And this will be a type of name because it's a row name of our tutorial prompt. And then I'm going to take this row name, and the first thing I'm going to do is do get data table row. And the data table we want is tutorial prompts, and I can connect that up. And doing this means we can break off the out row, and then we successfully have our text that we need to work with. So how do we get each individual prompt from the text, breaking it down into the sections we need? So I'm going to come and create a function up here called split text. And I'm going to add an input parameter of our text. And I'll set it to a type of text as well. And then we're going to start building up and loop over all these characters. So I'm going to drag off and I'm going to convert it to a string from string. Like so, and that'll break up each individual character, so PRESS, into an array, which we can now loop over. Once we've looped over this, we can start checking each individual character to see what we need to do with it. So if I drag off of this string and do 3 equals for triple equals, and I'm going to put the opening bracket on, and if you don't want to use the brackets and you want to use something else, just add that in. And then I'm also going to do the same thing under it for the closing brackets, and then I'm going to add a branch to each of them. And I'm going to say if it's the opening of a tag or the closing of a tag, then I'll add a branch. Then we know we've just either started or we've finished the current word and we've moved on to some input prompts. So in my local variables, I'm going to create a variable called current word, and this is the press such and such to build up. But I'll call it current words to make it a bit easier. And I'll set this to a type of string. I'm going to control or command D this to duplicate it. I'm going to control or command D to duplicate the variable. And I'm going to call it word array. And I'm going to right click the string to turn it into an array of strings. So if it's an opening or closing one, we want to take the current word that we've got and we want to add it to the word array, like so. And then I want to clear off current words to make it empty. And then that's all we need to do for that one, because we've started a tag, so we're processing any current words we want to add to it. The only caveat I will add is if the current word's length, so len, is greater than 0, then we want to add it. We don't want to add it if it's got nothing in it, otherwise our array will just be filled up with a bunch of nothings, and we don't want that. That's never a good thing. So I'll just wrap this in a comment, add current word to list. So in our case of press WASD to move, this will take press space and add that to the array, but then it will clear off the current word so we can move on to the next thing. The next thing we want to do is to start building up current words. So I'm going to take it down here and I'm going to append to it the current array element, like so, and then I'm going to set the current words, like so, and then plug that into the false. And then we'll add a comment on this one, set the current word. So starting with P for press, it will add it, then it'll go RESS space, and then it'll detect the bracket, and then it'll add the current word to the array, clear it off, and then carry on down here saying IMPUT colon move, and then move on. So we can easily distinguish what we have and what we don't have to make it really, really nice. The final thing I'm going to do is just take this loop over here and paste it down here, and then delete off the clear part, because we want to add the final word to the list, because if you have to move, it ends on here, it's never going to add it to the array before it completes. So as long as it's got something to add, it needs to add to it like so. And then finally, we can simply return the array. So if I add a return node, drag in our word array and drop it into there, and then we'll also do the same thing down here, just in case it has not got anything. and I'm going to hit compile and save. Now there's only one other thing we need to do, is we're successfully splitting the text now. So we've got press, movement, to move around as 3 separate array elements, so we know how to render it on the UI. But as it stands, we don't actually know whether the word is an input prompt or just a word to render. So I'm going to come back to my content drawer, and inside blueprints, inside my enums folder, I'm going to create a new enum. So right click blueprint enum, and I'm going to call it e_tutorial prompt type. A bit of a long worded one, but it does make sense. I'll add 2 of them, of text and input. If you want other ones like images, icons, you can add that in there as well. Now that we have the enum, I'm going to come back to my structs folder. I'm going to create another struct, and this one I'm going to call it s_tutorial prompt text. And inside this one, I'll add 2 variables. The first one being the text, which will be a string now. And the second one will be the type, which will be our newly added e_tutorial prompt text type. And what this means is now in here, if we modify this array to be, instead of an array of strings, we can use our tutorial prompt text and change the variable type. It will error, but that's completely fine. Up here, we're going to delete this add, and we're going to re-add it back in to make sure the data types are correct, and we'll plug it all in, like so. Then on the blue one, I'll drag down and I'll do a make, like so. So the text is going to be our current words, like so. And then we need a way of determining whether this is a type of text or input, so we can actually tell it correctly. And all I'm going to do is down here, just before we do any of this, so I'm just going to move it across a little bit. I'm actually going to take this same check and do it just before, and we'll tidy this up a little bit in a moment. And then all I'm going to do is promote this to a local variable called input starting. So if we first come into this loop and we find a square bracket, we're going to set the input starting to true, which means when it comes into here, we already know it's starting to process something inputty. So when it gets to this point, if the input starting is true, then we can just drag off of the type and do a select. And we can set this to our index, make some more room. If it's true, then we can set it to text. If it's false, then we can set it to input. And the reason we're doing it this way is if the input is only just starting, then it means it's about to add some text into it. So then we know that the input starting true is going to be text. Whereas if it's false, it's either because it's text, which none of these is going to let it in here, or it's an ending bracket, which meaning we're about to add input false. So it's kind of a reverse loop, I guess you could say. And then same down here, we're going to make some space just beyond all of this, and then we're going to take this make and the current words one and the adding up here. We'll delete this add and the word array there and paste it here instead. Plug it into the true. And we automatically know this one is text anyway, because it's got to end with a square bracket, and if it doesn't end with a square bracket, then it's not going to go into there. Just treat it as text. Finally, let's just adjust our return type to be our s_tutorial prompt text, and then everything should link up nicely. So if we hit compile and save, we now should have a function that's going to loop over all of our text, break it down into the individual segments and build it up for us. So back on our event graph, from this text here, we can now call split text, and it will give us out the word array of everything we need to build up. So we can now loop over this, and then if we break the array element, then I'm going to take off the type and I'm going to do a switch, and I'm going to plug this up to the loop body. And then if it's text, we know we need to create the text widget. If it's an input, then we know we need to create the actual input prompt for it. So, rather annoyingly, you can't actually create a standard text widget on its own. It won't let you do it. So we're going to create an individual child widget to handle both of these, but it gives us a lot more flexibility if we ever want to change. So back in my UI folder, I'm going to right click and I'll just do user interface widget blueprint, and I'll do user widget and I'll call it WB tutorial prompts text, and I'll open this up. I will come and add a simple text element because that's all I want. You can apply anything you want to it, but I'm just going to make sure it's a variable. And then in the graph, all I'm going to do on the construct and the pre-construct, why not do both? The difference is pre-construct will run when you hit compile, like the constructor in Blueprints, and the construct will only run when the game runs. I'm going to take the text block, drag off and do set text, plug it into both of these, and the text we want to set, I'm going to promote to a variable, and I'll call it, well, I'll just keep it called text really, but the key thing is I'm going to click instance editable and expose on spawn. I'll click compile, I'll give it some default text to move around, and if we hit compile and go back to the designer, you can see it will say to move around like so. If you want it to make it not look so big, just hit desired in the drop down. It will show you how big it's actually going to be when you create it. Then back on our single, if it's a text, we can now drag off it and do create widget. The class is going to be our tutorial prompt text. And you'll see it's automatically added the text here, which we can drag along and just convert this over like so. After we've done that, we'll just grab our horizontal box, and instead of calling add to viewport like you normally would, we're going to simply call add child like so. We'll plug it in and plug that into the context, and that should now successfully render all the text elements for us. And because it's inside a horizontal box, it should go along nicely. However, if we've got an input, then we need to do something a bit different. So I'm going to come over and create another widget, blueprint, and I'll call this one WB tutorial prompts input, and I'll open this one up. For this one, I'm going to come and add in the common action widget like so. Make sure it's ticked as a variable. I'll just give it a design time key of W so we can see it. I'll make sure it's desired as well so you can see it's all nice and tiny. Because of an earlier issue, I am actually going to come and wrap this with a size box. And I'm going to set the size box just to something standard like 32 by 32. Because I did notice earlier it was a bit large. And if you're better with UI, you might know a better way of doing it. But for now, that's okay. So on this common activation widget in the graph, I'm going to do the same thing that I just did with the CommonUI activation widget, but I'm going to come off and do set input action, just a single one because that's all we need. I'll plug that into both of these, and then it's going to ask us for a row, so I'm going to drag off and do make like so. I'll give it a data table, which is going to be our narrative input actions, and then the row name I will promote to a variable, and I'll just call it input row name like so. And then, just like we did, I'm going to tick instance editable and expose on spawn on here. I'll click compile. I'll make sure it's got a default row name, so I'll just type movement, and I'll hit compile and save, and you should see it now adjusts it. And because we've had to specify a design key, you won't see it update specifically, but that should be all we need to do. So you can see it's automatically added it into the input actions here already, but because of the default, so that's good. So back on our single, I'm actually going to copy this chunk up here and paste it below. We can't just do a switch on the class because we have a text variable which is going to change. I'm going to search for our tutorial prompts input, and you'll see it wants an input name which we can simply give it the text like so. Of a different type, we can plug it into the input, and that's it. I believe that's all we need to do to create the single one, ladies and gentlemen. So just to quickly run over the code, the construct runs, it gets the data table tutorial prompts and finds out which prompt we want to show, which I'm going to make sure we also tick instance editable on. Then it will come in, it will split the text up into the chunks that we need to actually loop over them. It's then going to loop over each one. If it's a text, it will render text. If it's input, it will render the input. If you've got any others, such as icons, animations, whatever, sounds, you can play them all down here. So now with our single prompt done, we can technically give it a bit of styling if we really want to. So I'm just going to come and add a basic tutorial prompt text into here. And I'll say to move around, use, and then we'll just add our basic tutorial prompts input in, just underneath it. And then we'll keep it as W, just so we can actually see what's going off. We'll set it to desired so we can see it. And now we can properly style it to how we want. So let's see. So based on this San Andreas one, I'm going to wrap the horizontal box with a overlay. And then inside the overlay, I'm just going to add an image, just like so. I'll set this to full width, full height. Then I'll set the colour and opacity to black. And then I'll just probably fade it out to probably about 0.6. And then I'll set the tint to black. And I'll probably set it to the alpha to about 0.6. I'll hit compile. I'll also do the same for the opacity here, so 0.6. And now you can just see the grid through it. You may want to tweak with the colours there. On the horizontal box, I'll add some padding. We'll do 15 just to give it a nice bit of spacing. And we'll hit compile and save. You can change all your fonts, you can do everything you need for that. One last little fix I'm going to do, because it'd be nice for us to keep that there, is in the graph, just before it starts processing it, I'm just going to get the horizontal box, and I'm going to do clear children. And this is just going to remove everything inside that horizontal box, but only when the game runs. And that means when it comes down here and creates more of it, it's not going to pile up next to this here. But it also means we can continue editing it. So now that we've built our single one, we can now move on to the tutorial prompts, which is the part where we keep the backlog of notifications we actually need to show or hide. So back on the graph, I'm going to delete the pre-construct and the construct. I'll delete all three of them because we don't need any of them. Then I'm going to add a custom event called show tutorial prompt. This one will take an input, which will be our tutorial prompt name, and that'll be the name that we have inside our data table here. So I'll set this to a type of name. From here, I'm going to come and promote it to a variable just as a quick thing, but all I'm going to do is delete that off and right click it, so it gives us a list of names that we need to show or hide. And then I can come and add off of this tutorial prompt name like so. So now we've got a temporary caching thing, if you will, a backlog. So every time we call show, it will add it to the list of prompts that we need to show. Underneath this, I'm actually going to create another event, so add custom event, called render next prompt. And all this is going to do is get the tutorial prompt name, and it's going to get the first one. We'll also check if it's a valid index, so is valid index. And the reason we're checking if it's a valid index is we may not have any more to render. So, if it's a valid index, true, then we can use this get here to go off and render the next tutorial. So I'm going to come off the true and do create widget. The class will be our single tutorial prompt, and you'll see it's asking for a row name, which we can plug in up here like so. The return value, we're going to add as a child to the overlay. So we'll do add child, and we'll plug it into the content like so. And we'll wrap this in a comment, show tutorial prompt. However, if it's false, then it means it's got nothing else to show. So we can simply take the overlay and we can just clear the children, which means it's just going to remove anything we've got there because we don't need to do anything else. So I'll hit compile and save. After show tutorial prompt, we need to actually know whether we can call render next prompt or not, because we may already have one currently rendering. So what I'm going to do is promote this tutorial prompt to a variable, and I'll call it current prompt, and I'll plug this in like so. So we can deal with it if we need to, and we can plug it into the content like so it's all nice and neat. Then up here, if the current prompt is valid with the question mark, if it's valid true, then we know we're currently rendering something, we don't want to do anything. However, if it's currently not valid, then we can successfully call our render next prompt because we know we've got nothing currently showing. So we'll wrap this in a comment of add to the backlog, and it will optionally show if it's got nothing currently there. Otherwise, it will come down here and it will try to render the tutorial prompt. The final thing we need to know is when the current prompt that's visible has finished, because when it's finished, we need to tell it to come back over here and call render next prompt again if it can. So, back on our single prompt here, I'm going to add an event dispatcher called on tutorial finish. And then back on the designer, I actually want this to animate in. So that's where it's going to be a perfect way for it to animate in and animate out. So I'm just going to click on the overlay and I'll add an animation and I'll call it play. And on here, I'll add the overlay. I'll add the canvas panel, that'll work. I'll tick the little plus and I'll click render opacity. At the start, I'll set it to 0, so you can see it's completely invisible. I'll wait about 0.5 of a second, so half a second, and I'll set it to 1, so you can see it's created the keyframe. And now it'll fade in like that. Then, depending how long you want it to work, if you want different tutorials to have different lengths, then code a timer and tell it to call a different animation. For me, I think we'll wait 5 seconds, so 5.5 because we've started it. Then I'll add a keyframe again, just by pressing the little plus icon. And then probably about half a second again, I will come and set it to 0. So you can see now it will show for 5 seconds and then it will fade out like so. And then only when the fade out is completed, so about 6:50, 6:25, we'll give it a little break for the user, because you'll notice the San Andreas ones don't come straight on and off. I'll add an event track of a trigger, and right at the end I'll just tick the plus. I'll just drag it back a little bit because it gets a bit flaky if you do it right at the end of the animation. So it gets a little flaky if you have it dead on there. I've had it in the past where sometimes it won't call it. Easy fix is just add your render opacity of 0 again at the end after it. So even though it's gone to 0, it's going to keep processing, run our event, and then just keep pressing just that tiny bit, but you're not going to see anything because it's invisible. But now we've got the keyframe, we can double click it, and we can simply call our tutorial finished like so. And then back on our event graph, as soon as we've rendered all of this on the completed, we can simply drag in our animation, play, and we can simply, ironically, call play animation. There we go. So it should come in, it should build it all up, then it should play the fade in animation, that will fade it in. It will wait for a little bit, then as it fades out, it will call tutorial finished, which on our tutorial prompts here, we will now hook into. And say, when you're finished, tell me. So just off of the current prompt, I'll drag in and do assign on tutorial finished. We'll plug it in. And then final thing we'll do is we can simply call render next prompt. And there we go, ladies and gentlemen. We've now created a life cycle for our tutorial prompts. So it will start with these tutorial prompts. We will at some point in the game call show tutorial prompt. That will add it to the backlog, which will come into here, and if it's not, we'll render the next prompt. So it'll come down here. It will check if it's... I'll just move that up there to make it a bit cleaner. There we go. It will check if the current index at the first top of the list is valid. If it's valid, it will then render that widget and show it on the screen. And it will wait for that tutorial to finish. Once it's finished, it will then call render next prompt. But before we just call that, all I'm going to do is take the array and just tell it to remove it, because otherwise we're going to get an issue. So I'll just remove index 0, like so. And all that's going to do is when this finishes, it will remove the first one, which is the one it's already confirmed it's using there, and then it will come back to render next prompt after it's removed it. Check if the current new 0 is valid, and then render it, otherwise just clear it. It's probably going to be a good idea if instead of clearing the children there, we just do it right at the beginning anyway. Just thinking about it while we're coding it, if we always wait until we call render next target when it's currently finished, it's invisible anyway, so we'll just clear it and then carry on. And if it hits false, then it doesn't need to do anything. It will just wait until the user next tutorial prompt. So with all of that long, complicated jumbleness thing, which wasn't that bad to be fair, we can now, in theory, try it. So back on this date changes here, I'm just going to come to my level blueprint, and on the begin play, I'll just set a timer by event, and I'll just set it to 1 second. So we'll wait 1 second when the game loads. I'll add a custom event. And I'll just keep it called custom event. And then from here, all we need to do is somehow tell our tutorial prompts to show tutorial prompt. That's it. So I'm going to come to my main HUD, where I store everything. And I will simply add my tutorial prompts in, my normal one. I'll add it to the canvas panel. Probably above the interaction widget so it doesn't block anything. I'll make it size to content, and let's see, where do I want my tutorial prompts to be? I probably want it to be over this side, and I'm going to move it out a little bit. I'll move it out a little bit. So I'll move it out a little bit, and I'll say probably 50 away from the wall. And then if we do it just under the weapon icon, that's a work in progress. I'll say probably about there, it can render it right there saying press such and such. Of course, if you are copying San Andreas, you can just add it to the top like you do. And then, back on our level blueprint, all I'm going to do is get my player controller. And then I have a special HUD, a special interface setup called Get Players HUD. All this is, if you don't have it, is on my player controller, where I first create my HUD here. I store it as a variable, and then I have an interface set up which simply gets that HUD back, so I don't need to cast to it. It's very nice, it's very clean, very optimized, so I don't have to cast to it. And then from here, we can do get tutorial prompts, and then finally we can call show tutorial prompt. So on here, I'll call it movement, and then the key thing is, which should work, is we can also call show tutorial prompt again. And we can add one called look. And let's give it a try, ladies and gentlemen. If everything works, 1, it'll be a miracle, but 2, it should show the tutorial prompt, wait 5 seconds, hide it, and then show the next one, wait 5 seconds, hide it, and then be done. Play. It will wait a second. And it'll say, there we go, so we can see press up to move, so we need to sort the positioning out, it fades out, and then it messed up on the second one. But that's fine, because that's progress. So, let's sort the positioning out. So back on the tutorial prompts, I'm going to come and add, inside the overlay, I'll just add one of the single ones, just so we can see what we're dealing with, like so. I'll set the screen size to desired and hit compile. Then back on our player HUD, we can see now it's hanging off look. So if I come and tick size to content, it will successfully position it like that. So that looks okay. So that's fixed that problem. One thing I will do, because we obviously don't want that visible when we start the game, is back on our tutorial prompts, on the graph, on event construct, I'm actually just going to make it call render next prompt. Partially because it's going to clear off the children, so the dev looks okay, but also it's not going to do anything because it's empty. But it does also mean you can add defaults into this list if you really want. Then you can make it show or hide that way as well. So now let's give it another try and see what happens. So press W to move around. That's looking very nice. I like that. So we can, oh good. And then the second one glitches out. So that could be if I've put the wrong name in. Just make sure you actually use the correct row name. So if I go back to the open level blueprint, you can see I'm using look. It's actually looking. And then one other fix I'm going to do, just for optimization techniques really. Before we call render next prompt, I'm just going to take the current prompt that we've got and just simply tell Unreal to add it to garbage collection to start removing it. So we'll just call remove from parent. Because you can't actually destroy a widget, you can simply tell Unreal to clear it up when you've done with it. So this time, if we try it, ladies and gentlemen, we now have an awesome input prompt. Press up to move around, we need to fix that. And then use the mouse to look around. How cool is that, ladies and gentlemen? And it should be completely cross-platformable because you have a controller. I don't think I've actually got a controller on hands, but CommonUI is natively cross-platform anyway, so it should work.
Go on, get! Stupid rats.
And he's telling the rats off. Thank you for that, Mr. Rat Guard. And then yes, it should also be completely translatable now, which is the even better part. So if you set up Unreal localization, because we've added it into text and we've manually split it up, as long as you keep the square bracket movement square bracket in any location, it will find what you need. That's how cool it is. We can also do special things, like if we come to this and do press that to move around, or press interact to interact, for example. And if we make sure we've got a key called interact there, look, it should, in theory, be able to render 2 of them. There you go. How cool is that, ladies and gentlemen? A real GTA San Andreas tutorial system. Now, of course, there's so many ways you can take this to make it better. You could improve the styling of it a little bit if you're good with UI prompts and stuff like that. Because of the way I've done it, you can basically come to any level and give it a tutorial to do. So if I come to my tent burning map, which is just a dev map for tent burning, but if I come to the level blueprint, get the begin play, if I set another timer by an event, and we'll say of 1 second, I'll add the custom event just like we did. Then I'll get the player controller, we'll get the player's HUD, we'll get the tutorial prompts, and then we can simply add a tutorial prompt. So the tutorial prompt, so if I name this tutorial prompt tent burning and compile and save, we can come back to our data table. I can add a new one, double click it and call it tent burning. I can set the text to press interact to burn the tent, and I start it now. You should see the tutorial, press E to burn the tent. So I can run up to the tent, tutorial plays, oh, I press E to set a fire, it will play the fire. How cool is that, ladies and gentlemen? We can now tune this in anywhere we want, any part of the game, to give prompts, and all you have to do is populate this data table and then proceed to put the call wherever you need it. There we go, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for watching. How would you improve the system? Would you change anything on it at all? Do you think there's an easier way to make it as generic as it is, but to suit your game better? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching. My name's Decryption, and I will see you next time.